This story took place back in the late 1960s, specifically in November of 1966. My name is Mark, and at the time, I was 21 years old, living in a small town just outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. If you know anything about that area, you know about the TNT area, a massive, abandoned World War II explosives manufacturing facility that had been reclaimed by the forest. Back then, there wasn't much for young people to do for fun, so my buddy Dave and I would often spend our Tuesday nights just driving around. Dave had this old, beat-up Chevy that he treated like a classic, and we'd usually end up near the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, the heart of the TNT site. It was a place of concrete bunkers and overgrown roads, and at night it was pitch black. I mean, the kind of dark where your headlights feel like they're barely cutting through the air. It was a particularly cold Tuesday around 11:30 p.m. We were cruising down one of the back roads that led past the old power plant. The air felt heavy that night. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like the atmosphere was thick, and both Dave and I were unusually quiet. Suddenly the radio started acting up. It wasn't just static. It was this high-pitched, rhythmic, pulsing sound that would drown out the music for a few seconds and then vanish. Dave hit the dashboard thinking it was a loose wire, but then the headlights dimmed. They didn't go out, they just weakened. "You seeing this?" Dave asked, leaning forward over the steering wheel. I nodded, looking out the side window. That's when I saw it for the first time. About 50 yards into the tree line, there were two lights. They were perfectly circular, about the size of dinner plates, and they were glowing with a deep, pulsating red. At first I thought they were reflectors on a fence or maybe a hunter's flashlight, but they were too high up, at least 7 feet off the ground, and they weren't moving, they were just watching. Dave slowed the car down to a crawl. He's always been the curious type, which, in hindsight, was a terrible trait to have in the TNT area. "Is that a deer?" he whispered. "No way," I replied. "Eyes don't glow like that, and look how high it is." As we got closer, the lights suddenly blinked. Not like a flashlight turning off, but like a set of eyelids closing. My heart dropped into my stomach. Dave stopped the car right in front of one of the old bunkers. The door was slightly ajar, a black maw in the side of the earth. Then the thing stepped out. It didn't walk like a person. It was a stiff, awkward movement, like its limbs were too long for its body. It stood at least 7 feet tall, covered in a dark, matted gray substance that looked like a cross between fur and feathers. But it was the eyes that held me. They were huge, hypnotic, and filled with a kind of intelligence that felt cold and ancient, and then it unfurled its wings. They didn't look like bird wings. They were massive, leathery, and had a span that must have been 10 feet across. It didn't make a sound. No flap, no rustle. It just stood there, towering over the road, its red eyes reflecting in the dim glow of our dying headlights. Dave didn't wait for it to move. He slammed the car into reverse, tires screaming against the gravel, and then shifted into drive, flooring it. We were flying down those narrow roads doing at least 70, which was suicidal given the curves. "Is it behind us?" Dave yelled, his knuckles white on the wheel. I looked out the back window. For a second, I saw nothing but the dust we were kicking up. Then I heard it, a sound I will never forget. It was a loud, piercing screech that sounded like a woman screaming, but distorted, like it was coming through a broken megaphone. Suddenly, a shadow eclipsed the moon. The creature wasn't behind us, it was above us. It was keeping pace with the car effortlessly, hovering just a few feet above the roof. I could see the tips of its wings dipping into the periphery of the headlights. "Go faster," I screamed. Dave pushed the Chevy to 80, then 90. The engine was roaring, the whole car shaking, but the thing stayed right there. It wasn't attacking, it was just accompanying us. It felt like it was playing with us, waiting for us to make a mistake. Every time I looked up, those red eyes were staring down through the windshield, glowing with that same steady intensity. As soon as we hit the city limits and the first few street lights appeared, the shadow lifted, the screeching stopped, and the weight in the air finally broke. Dave didn't stop until we reached the local police station. We told the officer on duty what we saw. He didn't laugh. In fact, he looked pale. He told us we weren't the first ones to come in that night with a story about the big bird with red eyes. Dave and I didn't talk much about it after that. He sold that Chevy a week later, claiming the engine was cursed. But I knew he just couldn't stand to sit in the seat where he'd felt those eyes watching him from above. A year later, the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. Some people say the Mothman was a warning. Others say it was the cause. All I know is that whenever I have to drive through the woods at night, I never look at the trees. I just keep my eyes on the road, praying that I don't see those two red lights staring back at me from the dark. This next story was sent in by a viewer named Elias. It took place in the summer of 2018, deep within the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. I was an experienced hiker, someone who preferred dispersed camping, which basically means finding a spot miles away from any established campgrounds or trails. I like the silence, the isolation, but as I learned on this trip, there's a big difference between being alone and being the only thing in the woods. I had planned a 3-day solo trek into a valley that wasn't even marked on most maps. I packed light, brought my dog, a German shepherd named Bear, and set off on a Tuesday morning. By late afternoon, I had found the perfect spot, a small clearing near a fast-moving creek, surrounded by ancient, towering cedars. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp, caught a couple of trout for dinner, and sat by his fire as the sun dipped below the peaks. But as the forest transitioned into that deep, oppressive mountain darkness, things started to feel different. Bear, who was usually the most relaxed dog I had ever owned, wouldn't stop pacing. His ears were pinned back, and he kept staring into the dense wall of trees across the creek. Around 9 p.m., just as I was about to crawl into my sleeping bag, I heard it. It was a sharp, heavy sound, like a baseball bat hitting a hollow log with incredible force. It echoed through the valley. I froze. I knew what a falling branch sounded like, and this wasn't it. This was deliberate. 5 seconds later, another knock came from the opposite side of the clearing. It felt like a signal. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line, but the beam only caught the trunks of the cedars and the shifting fog. I tried to tell himself it was just a weird acoustic trick of the forest, but the silence that followed was even worse. No crickets, no owls, just the sound of my own breathing and Bear's low, vibrating growl. I finally managed to drift into a light sleep, but I was jolted awake around 2 a.m. by the smell. It was a thick, oily stench, like a mixture of wet dog, skunk, and rotting meat. It was so powerful it made my eyes water. Then came the footsteps. These weren't the light, hopping sounds of a deer or the shuffling of a bear. These were heavy, rhythmic thuds. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Whatever was walking out there was big, and it was walking on 2 legs. I sat bolt upright, my hand gripping the hilt of my hunting knife. Bear was standing over me, his entire body shaking, but he wasn't barking. He was whimpering, a sound I had never heard him make before. Suddenly the tent shifted. Something had brushed against the side of it. A large, dark shape eclipsed the moonlight, filtering through the rainfly. I watched, paralyzed, as a massive hand, or what looked like a hand with thick dark hair, pressed against the nylon. It didn't try to rip the tent, it just felt it like it was curious. Then a sound came from right outside the zipper. It wasn't a growl. It was a series of rapid, high-pitched whistles, followed by a strange, chattering noise that sounded almost like a language I couldn't understand. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds before the footsteps began again, slowly fading as the creature moved back toward the creek. I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. As soon as there was enough gray light to see, I crawled out of the tent. I found Bear huddled under a nearby log, still trembling. When I walked down to the creek to splash some water on my face, I saw them. In the soft mud of the bank, there were a series of tracks. They were massive, at least 16 inches long and nearly twice as wide as my own boots. The toe prints were deep and clear. Whatever had made them was heavy enough to sink 3 inches into the packed earth. I didn't even finish his coffee. I shoved my sleeping bag and stove into his pack, not even bothering to fold the tent properly, and started the long hike back to his truck. The entire way back, I felt like I was being escorted. I would hear a branch snap 50 yards to my left. Then a rock would tumble down a slope to my right. Every time I stopped to catch his breath, I would hear that faint, rhythmic whistling again. It was as if the forest was telling me exactly where I was allowed to walk and making sure I didn't deviate from the path. I reached my truck around 4 p.m. My legs were screaming, and Bear practically leaped into the back seat the moment the door opened. As I started the engine and began to pull away, I took one last look in his side mirror. Standing at the edge of the tree line, right where the trail ended, was a figure. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. It was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair that seemed to absorb the light. It wasn't aggressive. It was just standing there, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway. I haven't been back to the Cascades since. I still hike, but only in well-populated parks, and never after dark. Sometimes, when I'm in my backyard at night and the wind blows just right, I can still smell that faint, musky scent, and I wonders if the thing in the woods ever decided to follow me home. They say the woods have eyes, and sometimes if you listen closely enough, they have a voice too, a voice that whispers your name from the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness. This story isn't about a monster under your bed or a ghost in an old house. This is about something far older, far more primal, something that embodies the very hunger of winter itself. My name is Alex, and this happened a few years back, deep in the remote forests of northern Maine. And I was an avid winter hiker, always seeking out the solitude that only a snow-laden wilderness can offer. Most people avoid the deep woods when the temperatures drop below zero, but for me, it was a sanctuary, or so I thought. It was late January and the cold was biting. I was a good 2-day hike from the nearest road, nestled in a small makeshift camp by a frozen stream. The air was still, heavy, and the silence was profound. The kind of silence that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. I remember thinking how perfect it was, how utterly alone I was. That night, something shifted. I woke up to an unnatural cold seeping into my sleeping bag, far colder than it should have been. And then the smell, a faint, sickening odor like something rotten and metallic, carried on a breeze that wasn't there a moment before. I dismissed it as a dead animal perhaps, or my imagination playing tricks in the isolation. But then came the sounds. Not the usual creaks and groans of a freezing forest, but something else, a faint, high-pitched whistling, like wind through bare branches, but with an eerie, almost musical quality. It seemed to circle my camp, never getting closer, never moving away. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound that felt ancient and wrong. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my tent, trying to rationalize the sounds, the smell, the cold. But by dawn, the whistling had stopped, and the smell had dissipated. I told myself it was just a combination of extreme cold and cabin fever. I packed up my camp, eager to put some distance between myself and whatever had unsettled me. As I hiked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The forest felt different, hostile. The trees seemed to lean in, their skeletal branches like grasping fingers. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my heart pounding against my ribs. And then I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, about 50 yards ahead, something moved. It was impossibly tall, gaunt, and moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones, a sickly gray, almost translucent in the weak winter light. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in what looked like razor-sharp claws, but it was its head that truly froze me. A skull-like face, devoid of lips with sunken glowing eyes that seemed to burn with an insatiable hunger, and from its mouth a single elongated black tongue flickered out, tasting the air. It wasn't looking at me, it was looking through me as if I were merely a meal waiting to be consumed. A deep guttural growl like grinding ice emanated from its chest, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, and I did. I ran blindly, stumbling through the deep snow, the cold, forgotten in the face of pure, unadulterated terror. I could hear it behind me now. Not footsteps, not really. More like a dry, scraping sound, and that chilling whistle. Closer now, almost a taunt. I risked a glance back. It was gaining. Its movements were impossibly fast, a blur of gray against the white snow. Its head was tilted, those burning eyes fixed on me. I could feel its hunger, a palpable force pressing down on me, trying to strip away my will to survive. It wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me, playing with its prey. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, muscles screaming. I knew I couldn't outrun it. This wasn't a creature of flesh and blood in the way I understood it. This was something else, something that fed on fear, on desperation, on the very essence of life. I don't know how long I ran, hours, maybe, or minutes that felt like an eternity. I remember collapsing, utterly spent, at the edge of a frozen lake. The cold wind whipped across the ice, and for a moment I thought it was over. The sounds had stopped. The oppressive hunger had lifted. I made it back to civilization barely. Frostbitten, emaciated, and haunted. I told no one what I saw. Who would believe me? They'd say I hallucinated from exposure or went mad from the solitude. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Now I avoid the deep woods in winter. The silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's pregnant with unseen horrors. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear it. That faint, high-pitched whistle calling my name. And I know, deep in my bones, that the hunger in the Whispering Woods is still out there, waiting for its next meal.